Coming up, the Tories hoped that the coronation might distract people from their disastrous showing in this week's local elections. But as 91% of the British population struggles to contain its disinterest in the coronation of its new unelected head of state, that plan clearly hasn't worked. The Tories hoped that with the Windsor mafia being headed up by a new Don, the British public would have the feeling of being at the start of a new era. But at the tail end of what will probably be 14 years of Tory rule, the opposite is true. There's a strange and almost hopeful end-of-days feeling here on Brexit Island. Public services are crumbling around us. The courts, the hospitals, the GPs, the dentists and the schools, they're all in crisis. There's an atmosphere of deep political disillusionment and dissatisfaction with the status quo, with the government reacting by doing their damnedest to make strikes and any form of social protest unlawful. There's economic dysfunction and the stench of government corruption and decay. Or is that just the sewage that their cronies and the privatised water industry have been pumping into our waterways? Despite their shocking performance in this week's local elections, there are several reasons why you can never rule the nasty party out. Stay tuned. I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button, subscribe, and above all, share a link to this video with your social media contacts. The results of this week's council elections broadly align with the polls, showing the Tories heading for the exit at the next general election. The popularity of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak seems destined to remain forever in negative territory. That said, Tiny Rishi is still more popular than the party he leads. After years of Tory misrule, it seems that the British electorate have had enough of a government that's on the side of the rich, the employers and the corporations. A government that's more interested in stoking culture wars than improving the lot of a population suffering the largest drop in living standards since the Napoleonic Wars. And it's about bleeding time. For over a decade, the Tories have been destroying the country they claim to love through austerity, Brexit and fiscal policies that have redistributed wealth from the poorest to the richest, with record numbers of children in poverty at the same time that we have a record number of British billionaires. Those two statistics are not unconnected. The Tories have also been politicising appointments to the BBC, the Arts Council, Ofcom and many other public bodies, while simultaneously stuffing the Lords with Tory peers and enriching their chums in the process. These measures are partly designed to neutralise the remaining few critical voices in an overwhelmingly right-wing British media, but also to ensure that the Tories' grip on power doesn't end should they be kicked out at the next election. The wealth of the very richest has skyrocketed under the Tories. Their programme of austerity, implemented by the pig-loving David Cameron in 2010 and continued by each consecutive Conservative Prime Minister since, has starved public services, created one of the most miserly welfare states in the developed world, and led to average wages decreasing in real terms year after year. Most people have experienced a real terms pay cut over the last 13 years of Tory government. Life expectancy has decreased, and child poverty has increased. In fact, it's actually really hard to think of one thing that has actually improved under the Conservatives for the average person in the street. Life under the Tories has become poorer, nastier, more challenging and shorter. Does that necessarily mean that the next general election will prove terminal to this ruling party? I'm sorry, but I don't think we can write the Tories off just yet. The party's history stretches back to the 17th century, the oldest but also probably the most successful political party in the world. So we can assume that whether in government or in opposition, the Conservatives will continue to find ways to maintain their cohesion of the party, to adapt to challenges and to preserve political power over British society, not just through Parliament, but as a result of all the other measures they put in place to ensure sympathetic operatives in positions of authority and influence. No matter what happens at the next general election, the chosen party of Britain's ruling class is not going anywhere. The Tories have won 8 of the past 11 elections. The Labour Party spends most of its time in opposition. Do you realise that next year, 2024, marks a period of 50 years, half a century, in which Tony Blair will have been the only Labour leader to have won an election? No wonder that the Overton window has moved so much to the right over my lifetime. Ideas currently being expressed by the likes of Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick would have been unthinkable just a few short years ago. The normalisation of having essential services like water, energy and public transport in the for-profit sector means most people don't even question why the hell they're not in public ownership. During their dominance, the Tories have created a nation in their own image, meaning that there's a degree of Tory rule even when they are His Majesty's official opposition, and I use that term advisedly. The monarchy, the unelected House of Lords, the public school system and Oxbridge continue to dominate the British political landscape. We have no written constitution as such, and please don't tell me we have, after Boris Johnson illegally prorogued Parliament and trashed many other accepted norms and standards. We have no elected second chamber, so checks on the ruling party's power are minimal, and the powers of the House of Lords are fairly limited even when they do try to actually exercise constraint on the government. And of course, the icing on the cake, the first-past-the-post voting system, is extremely undemocratic, with the Tories needing only about a quarter of the electorate to support them in order to gain a healthy majority in Parliament. Tony Blair had the opportunity to modernise and democratise this voting system and replace it with some kind of proportional representation. But his own ego convinced him that FPTP could continue to work to the Labour Party's advantage as well as to the Tories. A big mistake, as the one major party of the right cleans up under the current system, with the progressive vote being split between Labour, the Lib Dems, the Greens and the national parties in Wales and Scotland, gifting the Tories many, many more seats than they would get under a truly democratic voting system. The Tories convinced traditionalist voters that these undemocratic anachronisms are quintessentially British, symbols of traditional stability and echoes of a world-dominating colonial past. But they just also happen to be convenient supporters of the Conservative cause. The House of Lords is a particular pillar of strength for the Tories, whether in or out of government. Our unelected second chamber is fast approaching reaching the milestone of 1,000 peers, 1,000 members, making it much bigger than the European Parliament, which oversees 27 countries, making the insult unelected bureaucrats particularly ironic when spat out by the Brexitists. In fact, the House of Lords is the largest parliamentary chamber of any democracy. If you think we can still call the UK a democracy, that is. It's only surpassed in size by China's National People's Congress, which has 3 times as many members, though it's worth noting that China has a population 28 times the size of the UK. The House of Lords is a sleaze pit, the epitome of cronyism, a kind of legitimised corruption. A Prime Minister can give a job for life to anyone, a failed MP, their own father, a brown-nosed journalist, a press baron, the son of a KGB agent, a corrupt executive of an underwear firm who provided overpriced, not fit-for-purpose PPE equipment during the pandemic, or a party donor. In fact, usually a party donor, it seems. According to a recent analysis reported in The Guardian, 1 in 10 Tory peers has given more than £100,000 to the party. Imagine what the British press would be saying if that happened in an African country, for example. They'd call it out for what it is: institutionalised corruption. And that donor and all the other cronies get to sit as a legislator for life, regardless of their suitability, helping amend or approve the laws that apply to you and me. And the House of Lords is not the only mechanism used by the Tories to control the levers of power. There's the public school system. About half of Tory leaders went to elite boarding schools like Eton and Harrow. Oxford University has given us 30 Prime Ministers since 1721. That's more than half the total. And 3/4 of them went to public school. Equal opportunities. In the UK, you're having a laugh. Throughout their history, the Tories have worked incredibly hard to resist equality of opportunity, egalitarianism, using the tools of deference, tradition and patriotism. The King's coronation is a great example of how harder-thinking Brits are encouraged to take pride in these decrepit institutions, as if they themselves gain importance and prestige from the pomp and ceremony of the monarchy and the Lords, to actually take pride in their status as royal subjects rather than free citizens. And of course, the right-wing media plays a huge part in promoting these delusions of grandeur. They're another pillar in the Tory party's efforts to maintain their own vision of a servile Britain in thrall to the ruling classes. The press is losing some power in the face of social media, but apart from The Guardian, The Mirror and latterly The Daily Star, the biggest selling newspapers all ally with the Tories and provide a daily drip feed of jingoism, anti-immigrant rhetoric and other distractions from the Tory record on the economy, the standard of living, civil rights and the environment. The last Labour Prime Minister, Tony Blair, got elected after seducing some of these natural Tory-leaning rags to endorse his campaign, seeming more interested in receiving the blessings of the current system than he was on changing it. And the current Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, seems to be following a similar path. I don't believe a knighthood is a good look for the leader of a supposedly socialist party, which should be tearing down these elitist privileges and institutions and building a more egalitarian Britain. Like the Tories, Starmer seems to be pitching his political offering way to the right of the true sentiments of the British people. Just look how the public have shifted their attitudes towards Brexit far quicker than Sir Keir himself. How he seems so scared of seeming weak on immigration, despite the fact that the majority of the public don't see immigration as a major issue. Of course, I'd rather see a Labour government, or any government other than a Tory one. But Starmer seems to be playing by the Tories' rules. If there is a cause for optimism, it's that other visions of our society do exist. You can see it in the recent strikes, and in the climate and cost of living demonstrations, and even in the underreported protests calling for a second referendum on Brexit and for rejoining the EU. And you can also see the Tories desperate to snuff out these alternative visions through initiatives of an authoritarian nature. Illegally proroguing Parliament, bringing in draconian new laws to make disruptive protests and strikes illegal, pushing through American Republican-style voter suppression techniques like new and hastily implemented voter ID requirements that make it harder for young people and the less well-off to vote. These measures tell you everything you need to know about how the Tories are panicking and what their true feelings about democracy really are. Britain, and even more the Tory-voting England, are fundamentally liberal, progressive countries. But because we don't have a genuinely representative democracy, because of the way the system is stacked in favour of the Tories from top to bottom, from the public school system to first past the post, this progressiveness is stifled. The Tory party's remarkable ability to win elections doesn't give a true reflection of their real level of popularity. Remember, the way the system is rigged, they can win a majority in the Commons with just 25% of the electorate voting for them against the splintered progressive vote. The Tories don't represent the average British person, and their brand stinks after Liargate and Johnson, bullying and sex scandals, Mad Lizzie Truss and the Kwarteng budget. No matter how much damage they cause, no matter how unpopular they seem, the power of the media and the electoral system means that the Conservatives can never be ruled out. Unless Sir Keir stops playing by their rules and finds the courage to start calling out the Brexit lies, the horrors of privatisation, the redistribution of wealth to the very richest in our society, and the inflammatory, fascistic language surrounding refugees, even with the current 14% lead and their successes in this week's local elections, I don't think we can be complacent that the nasty party won't form the next government once more.